Hello. Welcome back to the Video Essay Podcast. I'm your host, Will DiGravio. Today's show features what is slowly and hopefully becoming a regular tradition here on the Video Essay Podcast. Back in 2020, the podcast partnered with Dr. Charlotte Crofts and the Cary Comes Home Festival team to put out a call seeking video essays centered around the idea of Cary Grant and Journeys. That call yielded a fantastic crop of video essays, and we had each of the creators join us for a conversation to discuss their work. At the end of last year, we reprised our call, this time asking for video essayists to submit work centered around the idea of class and how it relates to Cary Grant in both his life and his films. On today's episode, you will hear a conversation that Charlotte and I hosted with the video essayists who participated in Cary Grant, A Class Act. At the end of the episode, you will also hear some bonus audio from Lara Callaghan, who was unable to join us for our roundtable conversation, but after our invitation, did submit a short audio reflection on what it was like to participate. As always, you can learn more about the Video Essay Podcast at thevideoessay.com, and you can find links to the Cary Comes Home Festival and all of the video essays that were made as part of this year's program in the description below. Please also consider subscribing to the podcast's free newsletter, Notes on Videographic Criticism. Check out our new screening platform, Recycled Screenings, at recycledscreenings.com. And consider supporting the show on Patreon at patreon.com/thevideoessay. All right, hello everybody. Welcome to this very special edition of the Video Essay Podcast, featuring a group of video essayists who contributed to Cary Grant, A Class Act, which is the second collaboration between the podcast and the Cary Comes Home Festival, which is directed by Charlotte Crofts, who is here with us, which takes place in Cary Grant's hometown of Bristol, in the UK. So we're here just to have a conversation about these fantastic works, which you can view either on the festival website or at thevideoessay.com. There'll be links in the description to this podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube, wherever you're watching, we'll direct you there. And so Cary Grant is obviously a timeless figure. So maybe you're listening to this podcast a year from now, 2 years from now, a week from when we're recording. So whenever you are, you'll enjoy these video essays. So before we get to the video essayists, who are our focus here, I just want to kick it over quickly to Charlotte, Dr. Charlotte Crofts, to talk about this year's theme of class, and how it relates to the work of the festival. So Charlotte, over to you.
Thank you so much, Will, and thanks again for collaborating. I think this is so exciting. So the Cary Comes Home Festival is based in his hometown, Bristol, and Mark Glancy's biography came out in 2020 and actually revealed that Cary Grant had experienced a lot more poverty than people previously thought. So, for example, his grandfather died in the poorhouse and his aunt was in the workhouse, and she poured hot coals down her front because it was preferable to be put into a mental hospital than be in the poorhouse, because it's such a horrific kind of institution. And that was new knowledge, because nobody had realized that his aunt had been put into a mental hospital, which kind of makes a little bit more sense about why it was so easy for his mother to be committed. I don't know if you know the history of it, but his mum was committed and he came home from school when he was 11 and she was gone, and he was not told where she'd gone, and had assumed that she had died until he'd 20 years after he'd become Cary Grant, he learned she was still alive. So this huge kind of, life story of Cary Grant, which heavily impacted I think his personal life, but also I think his acting. I think it informs his acting as well. So his background in Bristol was a lot more complicated. Like, the house that he was born in is in Horfield now, and that appears in Stella's film, and it's now a really leafy middle class suburb, but it would have been sort of sublet workers' cottages, and it wasn't the middle class leafy suburb that it is now. So people kind of don't really, if you're from Bristol, you don't really understand what it meant to be growing up at the turn of the century. And I think a lot of the submissions really speak to that, the nature of that dichotomy between growing up as Archibald Leach and becoming Cary Grant, this kind of really sophisticated, stylish, symbol of high society. So we really wanted to make this a focus, but also because, what does Cary Grant mean to people growing up in Bristol today? That, you can start in Bristol and you can reinvent yourself. You can become Cary Grant. So we're very interested in social mobility, which comes up in a number of the films as well. And the festival aimed to try and not only discuss these, but also to be cognizant of low socio-economic class for people coming to the festival. So we did a sliding ticket scale, and there was a free ticket option for that. And one person took advantage of that and emailed us and just said it was amazing to have the opportunity to come. He wouldn't normally be able to come to this kind of thing. And yeah, so I was just really interested in also showing some of the roles that he's less well known for. So we showed Sylvia Scarlett and we showed None But the Lonely Class, and in both of them he plays the Cockney Cary version. And there's not much of an opportunity to see those on the big screen, so that was one of the other motivations. And I really wanted to work with you, Will, because the entries we had in our last collaboration I thought were really, really fascinating, and it's really, really interesting to see how people use clips of him in his performances to explore themes. So I just wanted that class to be something that was excavated by analysing his performances. And I don't know how many of you are British, or class is very taboo still in Britain, and we don't really like talking about it. So I just wanted to kind of pull the curtain on that and just say it's really important to talk about these things, because we're being ruled by people who haven't experienced real life in this country, and we need to look at all different kinds of experiences and have them represented on screen. So I've just gone on and on and on, but that was the motivation behind it. And I'm just so delighted by the level of filmmaking that you guys have done. I'm really excited to hear more about that.
Thank you, Charlotte. That was some necessary context, I think, to the conversation. It sounds like this year's festival was doing some really exciting things. So thank you. And I think one of the things that's exciting about getting to have this conversation is because I think that these issues of thinking about the theme of class is kind of explicit and implicit in a lot of ways in the videos that were created. So I'm really excited to hear from all of you to think about everything that Charlotte just said and how you thought about it in your own video, and maybe hearing Charlotte discuss it right now, you're thinking about your video in a new way, which is kind of one of the most exciting things about video essays, is you can kind of watch your own work and be like, oh, I didn't realize I was doing that there, or this is doing this here, stuff like that. So I think now we can just go around, and I would be eager to hear each of you just briefly introduce yourselves to the audience, and then just talk, generally about how you went about making your video. And then if you could also talk about how you thought about making it in relation to the theme of class. And again, we left this kind of call pretty open-ended, so I'm eager to hear in what ways it came into the final product. So I'll just go around on who's on my screen. So Wickham, we'll kick it over to you first. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I'm Wickham Flannagan. I'm from originally America, Illinois, and then lived most of my life in Florence, South Carolina. That will become relevant in a bit, but I'm currently now teaching in Turkey at Bilkent University, and I come from a sort of more experimental media background in terms of glitch art and things like that, but I sort of discovered video essays as being very fruitful for me because I love, movies, I love editing, and specifically love Cary Grant and grew up with him. So when I saw this call, it seemed like an obvious kind of way for me to express that. And my video is a little more, let's say, darker, I should say. I understand this is a celebration of Cary Grant, and I do celebrate him because when I was growing up, I had these sort of like actor figures that I idolized, and one of them was Cary Grant, and the other was Patrick Macnee as John Steed in the Avengers, the British television show, and so and several others, obviously, but those really stood out to me, and part of what was so inspirational for me. Do we want to get into the videos themselves, or do you want to just introduce ourselves, I should say? Can I continue down this path?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I didn't want to steal anyone's thunder. So I just, class was always sort of a part of their whole vibe, I should say. Patrick Macnee, this dapper British gentleman who has a wonderful apartment, is fighting crime. And then Cary Grant, obviously, I think it was specifically To Catch a Thief, the idea that you can live on the French Riviera, maybe you were a jewel thief in the past, but, no one really holds that against you. And you're otherwise, I guess the police do, but you're otherwise just sort of loving life and, raising grapes and having quiche Lorraine. And it was always just sort of a thing in our house. I grew up in a very middle class, both of my parents are teachers, house, and it was just these fantasies of hanging out in the French Riviera with Grace Kelly. Who wouldn't want to do that? And so I just became sort of invested in that fantasy, very, very much so, and I tried to pattern my whole behavior a little bit off of Cary Grant and John Steed as best I could, because I just saw a lot of positive things to emulate. And then when I thought about this task of class and the sort of duality that Cary Grant sort of brings, it occurred to me, looking back at those performances, that there is a level of sort of deception at play. Thinking about Suspicion, a movie that I often would reject because it wasn't the Cary Grant I wanted to see, the one that was overtly lying and being deceptive, even though something like His Girl Friday, he is still kind of doing that. He's in a more jovial, fun way, obviously. So I guess for me, it was my personal attachment to this character and wanting to be like him as a kid, and then sort of realizing, not just because of this duality that this prompt sort of revealed, but also kind of considering the levels of manipulation, and should we aspire to be this kind of person, or what aspect should we aspire to have? That was sort of my kind of burning question that I wanted to explore with this. And fundamentally, I would tell people, and this is a really silly thing, I would tell people I want to turn Cary Grant into a cat. I said that was my weird motivation, because a cat has that kind of mentality of being kind of ferocious, but also very debonair, in its own way. And that's something that To Catch a Thief obviously visually explores very, very aptly. So that was kind of my initial inspiration.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Yes, and we'll have time at in the second half to kind of have a lot of follow-up questions. Continuing here on going around the screen, I'll kick it over to Kendahl, if that's all right with you.
Yeah. Well, first off, I wanted to thank you and Charlotte for the opportunity a couple of years ago. I mean, that led me on quite a merry adventure. It made me realize that it's been the first part of my life taking in all these films, and I had been looking for a way to process that. And I've been making lots of videos since maybe that first video for that event, and started a podcast and realized that using images and sound to process all of these things I've taken is how I'm going to spend the second half of my life. So it's really was quite a large thing for me, hooking up with you all the first time. This time I immediately thought of doing Holiday. I do see the duality of class in a lot of Cary Grant's performances. There's always this feeling of him maybe feeling a little bit like an imposter. You just see you know, bits of it here and there. And I think that's what makes him appealing, is that he's so gorgeous and debonair, and that you see that tiny bit of insecurity. The thing about Holiday that I loved was that he's actually really not terribly insecure about those roots. He, in fact, is a little defiant about them. He's, you know, the money to him is a means to enjoy life further. It's really nothing else. And so that's why I wanted to do that particular film. But at the same time, that the two parts of him at odds with each other, combined, doing all these different, this little dance, you know, was very interesting to me. So it was very satisfying to work with that film because of that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and it was exciting to see kind of the sequel to your original video essay that you made for us as part of our first journey, which I don't know if we said, but was around the theme of journeys. So thank you for that. Yeah, Stella, if we could kind of kick it over to you to again introduce yourself and your video and how you thought about it in relation to our theme.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay, I'm Stella. I'm a student at the University of Bristol. I live in Hallfield, so I just, well, obviously, I love Cary Grant, so I always walk past his house every day, and I think like it makes me think about like the fact that he was there before. And so I kind of went on a walk around the common, and I just brought I was trying to find it a minute ago, but I can't find it. I had this like tiny little pink camera that is like covered in stickers, and I just went on a walk and just filmed people that I saw going by, or like places that I just thought looked nice. And then I was in my head matching them to like scenes in films. So I saw the bench and I thought like certain films, and then I saw people walking, I thought of certain films, and then as I went home with it, I then kind of matched the scenes that I filmed to scenes with Cary, and then ending up at his house. And I love that scene from Monkey Business, when at the opening credits, when he's like, "Oh, not yet, Cary," and so I thought it was funny to put that in when I was actually at his front door. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I was wondering if that footage was originally shot by you and where it was sourced from. So great to get that backstory. And then before we get to our kind of more general group discussion, we'll end with Daniel.
Oh, thanks, Will. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay on here? Great, thank you. Well, thanks so much for including me in this group and being part of this. It's great. So my name's Dan O'Brien. I'm a lecturer at Essex University. I live in Kent. I'm fairly new to this medium of video essay. When I say that, I suppose I've been dabbling for about a year or so, and that's how I've kind of got to know Will. It was through doing some entries on the TV dictionary, which sort of brought me to Will's podcast, which then allowed me to find out about this wonderful festival. And I thought, yeah, why not? I'll have a go. And as soon as I'd made it and sent it, I had this kind of sense that I'd somehow misinterpreted it and got it wrong, and saw that Journeys was something from last year. And I thought, no, maybe I've got this, I haven't done this right. But then I kind of relaxed and thought it's open to interpretation. And one of the interpretations I had with this was about travel and class, and particularly first class. I suppose my first image of Cary Grant, or one that I always think of, is the North by Northwest image, and the crop duster and that kind of arresting imagery of planes. And it occurred to me in that film that planes and trains and cars are used so frequently in Hitchcock films, but also in a lot of Cary Grant films, really. So I was pleased watching all the other entries that travel was also part of that. But with the name Planes, Trains, it kind of made me start thinking of the wonderful planes, trains and automobiles. And I thought I could play a little bit with the title cards, and I'd just do that bit and see if that worked. And then I'd do a little bit more and a little bit more and see if I'd have a submission. But it got me thinking a lot about planes, trains and automobiles through the class system that's going on in that film, and the kind of white collar, blue collar of the two leads within that. So it seems to make me readdress that film and maybe kind of catch on to some of the themes that we're talking about here with the Archie Leach and Cary Grant dichotomy. So I think it kind of worked, or it made me to sort of revalue it in different ways, looking at all the other entries too. So I was really pleased mainly to sort of look at all the other entries and felt that my one wasn't completely out of place with that, and there was some reoccurring themes going on. But overall, it was wonderful to be included in such great work. I was very pleased. Thank you.
Well, thank you. When I was learning video essay, the mantra that I learned from my teachers was make first, think later. So you made first and then you thought about it later. So it was deep inside you, and deep inside your head somewhere. And I just want to briefly, before maybe Charlotte, I'll kick it over to you for kind of just your thoughts generally on the videos and watching them. There is one more video essayist who contributed, Lara Callaghan, and Lara has agreed to record a separate reflection as part of this conversation, but couldn't join us here today. So we'll be looking forward to hearing about the creative process behind that video. So if you're watching now, they will probably be edited into the end at some point. So please be sure to stick around. But Charlotte, I'd be eager, just to hear your thoughts, what it was like to. Oh wait, I guess I made a video. So
Will, you've made a video. Tell us about yourself.
I kind of forgot.
Video.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Will. So my video, Bid Up, was I'm obsessed with that video of the selling of the Salvator Mundi, the Leonardo da Vinci painting at Christie's, because it's just absurd. And I always think about this Fran Lebowitz line where she says something about people applaud at these auctions, not when the artwork walks in, but when the price is sold, right? They should be applauding the Picasso, not the price, I think is what she says. So I always think of when I watch this video, and of course I love the Cary Grant scene in North by Northwest where he messes up the auction. And so I thought, there's something here. I can do a fun mashup. And I've always just thought of that North by Northwest scene in relation to class, and just making a total, he's being a fool, but it's actually the entire situation on its own without him acting out is inherently foolish. So I think of him just drawing out the absurdity of auctions and the way rich people buy art and stuff. So for me, it was definitely a make first, think later kind of thing. Like I just put them both in Premiere and just kind of sort of messed around. And if something made me laugh, I kept it in and thought, this means that it's working. So it was really fun for me to make. So I didn't originally know if I was going to contribute, but I think one day the YouTube algorithm put that Christie's video on my front page, and I was like, wait, I can do something here. So yeah, that was my contribution. So okay, now over to you, Charlotte.
It's just really interesting to hear like how all of you got into it. And Stella, you're cheating because you actually live in Horfield, right next to where he grew up, which not many video essayists probably do. But no, it's really, really lovely. I mean, Kendahl, like, I'm so delighted that we've inspired this kind of shift in your career or your passion with film, and actually using the videographic methods to explore your love of film. I think that's so exciting, and such a wonderful piece of work. I love Holiday. We've shown it at the Cary Comes Home. We've showed it one Valentine's at the Cathedral, and it's just such a delightful film, and it is actually quite wonderful seeing it on the big screen if you've had the opportunity. But I think your essay just really draws out that delicious tension between Cary and Archie, and I just love the level of detail of sometimes his hair's kind of gone to the Archie side, and then sometimes it's slicked back, and I think it just draws out his prowess as a performer, that he's so in charge of his body that he can be Cary and Archie almost at the same time. Can you say a little bit more about, that was something that I got from yours. Is that something you were trying to explore? Can you unpack that a bit more?
The physicality of the performance was huge to me. I've been doing a lot of reels for Instagram and TikTok as well, and I did one that was purely about his acrobatics in that film, because the acrobatics are impressive and wonderful, and yet they dip back into his humble beginnings at the same time. So even just the act of doing a somersault shows that duality. I think he deliberately uses his physicality in that performance. I think the lock of hair is no accident. And I think you're right that he does it so smoothly. And it kind of shows how he can belong in both worlds, even if there is that little part of him that's always feeling maybe the shame or discomfort of where he came from.
It's amazing. And obviously the acrobatics is important for the to catch a thief and the cat-likeness. I mean, you wanted him to be a cat. Can you talk a little bit more about the cat-like aspects of Cary Grant's performances, Wickham?
Yeah, sure. I think to the point about the physicality of it, like that's not something that you can sort of fake, right? Like I remember, and y'all can correct me, maybe you know more. I mean, I've watched North by Northwest many times. He does appear to be climbing that wall. There's the bit of him skulking on the roof and To Catch a Thief. So you can imagine him doing that. I guess because I was so familiar with both films, I assumed he was, of course, doing that. I mean, as his character and just in general, he could skulk on more roofs. But I guess it was just that can't be faked, that there was an element of grace to the physicality of those things that, that would be one of the bits of trivia that my parents would say, like, him walking between these two windows, he can actually do that because he was an acrobat. And I guess that always sort of contrasted in my head to the more suave, sophisticated notion of it, because it is just so bodily in that way. And I don't know if I'm attributing that to class specifically, but I guess it is the front, right? That you can't put up a front to the actions that you're performing. And I mean, even in To Catch a Thief, though, when he's on the roof at the end of that movie, they still have to show his face, right? Like it's still Cary in that moment, even if in Holiday there you get more of the dynamic. He still has his hair perfectly done, even though he's stalking out this fancy dress party, and he's not the one at this this particularly high class affair. He still looks as debonair as ever, even though he's on top of the roof, as it were. So I still think that he's not committing to Archie maybe in the same way in To Catch a Thief, because there is a romanticism to a jewel thief, and even it's not a even in the context of being a thief, he's the highest class thief he can possibly be, living in his villa, or I guess now he's living in his villa. So I guess the cat-like notion of it was the grace, the sophistication, despite being someone who's inherently kind of doing nefarious things, shall we say. I never really trust cats, but I always appreciate their sleekness, and I think Holiday, he's deliberately maybe not as sleek, so there you see more of that contrast.
And Stella, so you're you were inspired by seeing these glimpses of people in situ, in real footage of Bristol. But I think there's a lot, you've kind of made it sound really easy. I just thought about things, you make it sound easy, but there's a level of sophistication in the way you've stitched that together. And what I really loved about yours is the way you overlaid dialogue over present day Bristol. I just thought it was really, really effective. Is that something that emerged just through having a play with the footage on the timeline, or something that you always thought that you would do? Or talk a little bit more about your process there. And was there an aha moment when you went, oh, this is really starting to work?
Well, okay, so it took a lot of trying to get all the scenes often involved having to download the whole film onto my laptop and then just cut, or in some instances download the audio separately. I didn't want it to be really stop start. I do a lot of video editing. I have a YouTube channel, So I kind of I'm used to editing like films or TV shows, and then having like songs or various other things like laid into it. So that's just something I kind of like naturally like to do. But yeah, as I was making it, I was just thinking, oh, it's kind of awkward if it's just like silent and then into the next clip. So I wanted it to kind of be like a sort of like tapestry of different films and different like versions of Cary and stuff. And also there was just so much good music in the films. Like I kind of I use a bit of the music in The Bishop's Wife at the end. It just made such a nice kind of ending, like fanfare. But then I also like the kind of jaunty monkey business music, and then there was some like darker music for Notorious, and it just all sorts of. I felt like bad to cut it out. I was like, I want to hear that as well as the dialogue.
I think it really demonstrates those different levels of performance and the way that he was such a versatile actor. I think, as you said, was it? I don't know whether it was you, Wickham, or Dan, but you know, I think it was you, Wickham. You know, this very suave and debonair version of Cary Grant is the one that we kind of talk about, but actually. He did play in a range of work, and he does make a fool of himself in a lot of things. So Dan, you were kind of like thinking, oh no, I've made the one for the last call, because you were doing all these journeys. But I think what I was really fascinated, and it came across in a number of the videos, was this idea of social mobility and sort of class shifting or code switching or whatever, however you want to talk about it. And I think you used the vehicles as a vehicle to explore that. And I mean, do you want to say a little bit more about that, about the social mobility?
Yeah, definitely. And you're absolutely right. It was vehicles that was the vehicle for this. That was how I kind of, that's a nice way of putting it, really. That's kind of how I started to look at films. And when I was looking at the deadline for this, I wasn't quite sure if I was going to make it or not. So I'd found a copy of Bringing Up Baby in a charity shop when I'd been out and about, and I'd just put it on because I was looking after my young son. I thought I'd play a little bit of this and see if I can get some ideas. And then like the very first image is them arguing, Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn arguing in the car. And I thought, you know, I think there is something here. Then I started looking at other things, and I watched bits of A Touch of Mink. I haven't seen it properly yet, but I just kind of whizzed through on the timeline to find moments in cars or taxis and planes, and it was quite easy to find. So it started to kind of build itself in a way. It was once I had that, and I think the first class idea was always the kind of thing in my head. I think towards the end, when I saw that the last call had been on Journey, and I think that's when doubt set in. But that was certainly the way that I approached it. But yeah, social mobility, and I mean, a lot of the teaching I do considers cinema and transportation, and particularly trains. And I love the fact that in Charade, for example, Cary Grant is being quite he's not very debonair as he is in North by Northwest. He's more threatening in that moment, and I like sort of putting those two bits side by side. So we've got the kind of suaveness in the carriage, and right next to it, him trying to get into it. And I think there's a close up with his hand moving as he's lighting the match, which is also a close up of the hand on the car door as he's trying to sort of desperately get through. So there's this kind of calmness and kind of frenziedness going on that's side by side there. So I kind of liked little bits like that. So that they were kind of how I started to construct it, and then just kept on trying to nod to planes, trains, and automobiles by having a little bit of dialogue here and there. And I was actually really pleased of just getting a little bit of the music in at the end too, just to kind of remind us of that relationship with it. But it was one of the funnest things I've done in a while with this, because I don't know, it just felt so open to interpretation.
Oh, that's so cool. And so Will, with your bidding one, I mean, that scene is very important in the film, in the sense that he is confronting her for the first time, and I can't remember any of the characters' names now. I've gone completely blank. But I love the way you talked about the absurdity of auctions, but that particular auction and the kind of, I guess, the MacGuffin of the object that was being bid for ultimately, which ends up being I think rolls of film inside a figurine or something like that. It's an important scene, but he just makes so much fun of it. And what does the woman say? I can't remember what the woman in the audience says to him when what's the line?
Did she say you're a professional idiot? I
think,
or
something like that. Something really intense.
I love that. Yeah.
And I think it's also keying into that aspect of performance. When I say performance, I don't mean performance as an actor, but performance of identity, isn't it? Because I think the line is something about him being a fake or something like that. I can't remember, and that runs through North by Northwest, doesn't it? That he isn't really who he is. He thinks he is all the way through. And I think that feeds into this idea of when one shifts identity like that, and you're always worried about you're going to get found out or something like that. And I think that's underlies the absurdity of an auction, that this inflated price for something which it's just completely mad. So I think your video really got to something really critical about class there, even though you sort of say it was just something you were mucking about with, and it's something that was a bit frivolous and a bit funny. I think it's quite important, the point that you're making.
Well, and I just I wanted to say that I instantly thought of that Banksy auction where the image was shredded.
Yeah,
I really thought you characterized that moment with this video. It had that tone of just, ripping the mask off in a way.
And sorry, Will.
No, I was just going to say thank you. Yeah, I think it's just like, it's notable, right, that the James Mason character, right, the villains are the ones at the auction, right? So it's it's Hitchcock finding, I guess, the humor and the absurdity in those things. And of course, North by Northwest is filled with all of these moments where Roger Thornhill is essentially being recognized and treated as Cary Grant, right? Like with people like oohing and ahhing over him, or when he has the photograph taken and things like that. So I think you're spot on, Charlotte.
That moment when he jumped across the window into the woman's hospital bed, and she goes, "Stop!"
Yeah.
And he's being Cary Grant at that point, isn't he?
Right.
So did any of you, how are you going to do the next bit, Will, in terms of, I'd love to hear if anyone had a chance to watch each other's, and if you've got questions for each other, it'd be really lovely to have a bit more of a conversation.
Yeah. I guess, would just anyone, I don't want to put people on the spot here, because I certainly understand if you didn't have time to watch everyone's video yet, or anything, but does anyone here want to go first and kind of just either offer a comment or a question? Someone else's? I saw Daniel's first.
I was just going to say, I watched all the videos. I loved all of these, but I had a quick question for Stella, actually. I think you might have already answered it, but I assumed that on your video, which was great, these were actual locations from the film, but I think you've answered already that they weren't. But the bench, for example, I thought that was the real one. And I was going to ask about the tree, because it looked really similar, but I wondered if you'd taken it from a different angle, or suddenly if all the buildings had disappeared or something.
No, these are just places. It's all about like a 4-minute walk from my house. So I just kind of, and like maybe 1 minute from Cary's house. So I just kind of walked around. I had in my mind, I was like, I could make something for this project, but the deadline is in like 2 days. It's probably too late. I'll just go for a walk and like film stuff. If anything comes of it, like I can always like edit it. Because I do just make like, I kind of like film things all the time and then don't make things of them. And then I just kept, they aren't places from the films. I just saw a tree and I was like, yeah, perfect. But I guess looking, like when I was actually going through the footage and like looking at the films, I went, oh, that actually kind of does look like the tree, or that kind of does look like that there. And then I was like, okay, well now I have to actually like make this video. I don't have to just keep this content in my little camera forever. But yeah, they're not real.
Testimony to the fact that you kind of matched it so well that you fooled somebody. But I love what I'm really getting from this conversation is that point that Will made about act first and think later. And I think that that's a really useful thing for anybody that's thinking of making a video essay. And I teach video graphics criticism to my students, and they're like, I can't do it yet. I haven't figured out what I want to do. It's just like, just get it into the Premiere and start playing with it, and something will emerge. And I'm a huge procrastinator, and I haven't made an entry for the Journeys one or this one, and both having intended to. But I am working on another video essay about something else, so I will get that done eventually. But I love this kind of like, just have a go and see what emerges. And, you know, it's fabulous that this prompt has kind of got this work going.
I sort of developed this tactic from graduate school, and my students do this and I tell them not to do it, but sort of a creative pressure cooker where I just sort of say, I'm going to make this in 24 hours. And then usually by the end, subconsciously things get weirder. And so I'm just sort of making associations kind of, you know, and yeah, in a more subconscious way. And that usually works out. It makes some amount of sense by the end. And then I obviously get more perfectionist about audio and things like that. But yeah, it's just sort of putting the pressure on yourself to finish it in a timely fashion usually ends up working out pretty well, even though I tell my students, you know, do these things way ahead of time so that, you know, you don't worry too much about it. I actually had a question for Dan, or a comment. Daniel, should I call you Dan? I don't know.
Dan is fine. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. But one thing that I observed in just the idea of travel, this is something that Laura's actually sort of gets into as well, is the idea, maybe more so with the bus versus the car, and then something I had forgotten in Suspicion, the idea that he has a third class ticket for the first class compartment. I think that's a brilliant sort of his character introductions in all these Hitchcock films usually involve transportation. But something else I thought of with yours is, and with To Catch a Thief, is this idea of like a travelogue being a form of, you know, fantasy or living vicariously. You know, North by Northwest is a precursor to James Bond films in a lot of ways. And the idea that he goes to all these exotic locations, I mean, you know, the Plaza Hotel, if I believe, in North by Northwest, and then Chicago, and these very, very nice places, and then the French Riviera. I think the element of just being on these, you know, very nice methods of transportation. I don't know if being in the middle of nowhere next to Chicago is the ideal spot, but I think that's an element to the kind of class nature of traveling, is just living vicariously through these different environments. And that's certainly something that your video explores, and, you know, Hitchcock is doing all over the place with his usages of his characters.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Sorry.
No, I was just like, really, because there's a really good book by John Ury called The Tourist Gaze, and it talks about tourism is generated by tourism, by images of exotic locations. And we know that from his autobiography, when he arrived in New York, he was just blown away by the skyline because he'd seen it in the movies in Bristol. And he says that. So I just love this idea of his images of New York being watched by Archie Leach in Bristol, and then he ends up going to New York. And so the travelogue, I think, is very important in terms of class mobility as well, and travel becoming accessible to a wider range of people in the kind of that period of the 20th century. I think it's there's something very structural about that, if that makes sense, in terms of society. Yeah, I just love the idea of him on meeting Douglas Fairbank on the deck of the Olympic, which he would have been a first class passenger and Cary was a second class passenger. I just love that idea of then went on to emulate him. But I sorry, interrupted, Dan. Maybe you had a response.
No, not at all. No, some really great points. And when I was watching Lara's video as well, that scene just seems so pertinent that I wish I'd had included that one. But again, it sort of seemed to fit quite well in the corpus of all these together. But yeah, really important. And I think what's quite nice is seeing Cary Grant as a passenger and a driver as well. I mean, I was quite surprised when putting these clips together just how long the kind of drunk driving scene is. I thought it's only a minute or two, and it's like 5, and I thought I can't. This is why I'm going to have to do some side by side here, because I can't just have it on that. It would be too long. It'd be like a 10-minute entry. But that and the kind of interaction with Katharine Hepburn, that was 5 minutes as well. So it's just really interesting just how long some of these scenes are dedicated inside vehicles and inside trains. Yeah, I mean, I edited that scene together. There's bits cut out of it, but it's still a long piece when watching it. And it never, North by Northwest never seems that long a film when I sort of think about it from memory. But yeah, I think really important as a precursor to James Bond films. I mean, the thing that we can sort of, I think the thing that was always enjoyable about Bond films was locations and the kind of going to different places, and you know, that's sort of defines the adventure films a little bit, I think.
Well, and that's interesting because wasn't he in the running to be Bond, or they wanted him to be Bond, something like that? I don't remember the story about that.
Yeah, I think he was asked to be Bond, but he turned it down because he felt like he was too old, which is really ironic because the people who ended up playing Bond. But he knew it was going to be a long running franchise, and he didn't feel. But I think he was the inspiration for the original Bond. I think possibly from Notorious even. Yeah, and then there's also rumors that he was actually a spy, so in real life. So has anyone got any other thoughts or comments on each other's work or the themes that came out from watching?
Well, I just wanted to comment on the variety. Everybody here kind of said that they had an idea and they maybe weren't so sure at first, and then they just went for it. And I really felt like the personality in these videos was committing to that idea and believing in it. And that's what made them all so interesting and gave them their unique flavor. I really appreciated that.
And I'm asking you, Kendahl, because this is your second one that you've done with us. And just to say a bit more about your process, like, do you act first and think later, or do you think about it very carefully and script it and then find the clips? What's your process of constructing such a strong argument?
I go in with an idea and then the clips lead it. That's the way it was when I worked with Notorious the first time. And the only thing that's really changed is that my process is more streamlined. But I develop it by working with it. And sometimes it can take me off in a completely different direction. So it is a journey.
So is the voiceover the last thing that you do, kind of stitching it together? Does that is it shaped by the clips, or how do you write?
I'll have a framework going into it. I'll have it in my mind. I'll sit there talking to myself while I'm looking at clips. And then that eventually becomes what I'll record.
Nice.
It all kind of winds into each other. It's almost impossible to really describe what happens, but
you get into a flow state.
But it is inspired by the work. I mean, I think that's why I found it so intriguing, was that it was different from, say, writing in the process, because there were all these things inspiring it, because you've got music and image, and then what do I want to say about it?
I've just where I teach, because I teach on film and video games and interactive media, but I've just introduced a video essay assignment to a video game module, and I found that it's the most firsts I've given for any assignment, because everybody just seems to get behind the task so much. Because as you said, Kendahl, it's a different way of expressing and using sound and imagery to get, and narration. There were so many videos with narration which I wasn't expecting, but they were fantastic. And it just seemed like everybody had enjoyed the assignment. And I found doing these, I mean, I've done a few, not that many, but it's like yourself, it's something I want to get into a lot more and learn a lot more, and at some point hopefully become the main sort of focus of the way that I approach these things. I'm certainly looking at films differently now. I'm thinking about how things could be edited, and looking at social media and how things could be edited, and kind of linking these different things together. Wickham, I was really pleased that you used cat people in your film as well, and I thought that was, you know, such an interesting way to link things together and get ideas across. And I don't know if that's possible as clearly in an essay. I mean, it is, but not not in the short space of time, and not to get the idea as clear in someone's mind. And I just think it's such an interesting approach to doing it.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to communicate, like Stella going right on her doorstep and finding connection to these images decades ago, like making it real, giving it kind of a real feeling like that. There's so many ways to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of makes me want to go to Bristol now and just seek out those locations and learn about.
We're a biennial festival, so the next proper festival weekend will be in 2024, probably in November. So you've got time to book in a trip. And shall I do, like, I think acrobatics might be the theme for the next one.
That's exciting. I want to come visit too. I also want to say something about Lara's video, just to kind of just to kind of bring it in here. Just a superbly edited video in more ways than one, like just technically, and also kind of emulating the graininess of the film stock at various times. And it's looking at kind of Cary Grant's 4 Hitchcock performances. And one of the things, just to kind of talk on maybe a more formal level here for a moment, is using these thin vertical lines that are essentially slices of each of the films and kind of having them all side by side and then dipping in and out of them. Like it almost felt like they were literally being weaved together, right? And that you were literally finding the through lines through their performances. And so a really interesting way for how, form and the content of the video kind of come to inform one another. I
was going to say, it reminded me of, is it, who did the North by Northwest one last time with the...
Oh, yes.
Was that Alan O'Leary?
Ian
Garfield.
Garwood?
No.
Garwood?
No, I don't.
No, there were two. Were there? Anyway,
it was Ian. Sorry, I'll just
Google it. Come on.
Ian Magor. Yes.
Sorry, Ian Magor. I really liked that, and it's very different use of the vertical lines, and it's doing a completely different thing. But I thought Lara's the collage of Cary Grant being put together by the hands and like just revealing the construction of that identity, I thought was really, really powerful opening. And then the kind of the Hitchcock cameo next to Cary in the bus at the in To Catch a Thief, and kind of like having a little window. I mean, it's very, very stylishly done, but also making really interesting points about that kind of working class heritage of both director and actor, and it taking Hitchcock to kind of draw out what it meant to have that duality between Archie and Cary, and how it could be a bit sinister and stuff. I thought that was really powerful.
Yeah, and we really have such a range of different approaches here, right? We have voiceover, and then we also have text on screen. We have Wickham, whose video I think really dips into that more poetic side by the end, right, where you're getting into the superimposition and things like that. And Daniel I was really interested in yours, like treating the just kind of the canvas of it all, and where you're kind of resizing images and directing our eye. And then we have Stella using original footage, right, and bringing in your own filmmaking. And so it was just really exciting to see. I think if someone didn't know what a video essay is, right, they could watch just this short collection of videos and just be like, oh my god, there's so many different approaches and things that we can do. So, and I think also a testament to Cary Grant's body of work that we can do this twice and have 2 sets of video essays, many of which are dealing with, like the Hitchcock films, for example, will always, come to the forefront or what have you. But they all feel totally fresh and new. And so it was, really exciting to watch. And we're coming up on the hour here, but I'm just wondering if anyone has any final, any final thoughts or conclusions. And if not, maybe Charlotte, you can kind of tease what's ahead for Cary Grant as you've already done. And it's a couple years away. You're just recovering from the last one. Yeah.
I mean, I just feel really privileged to have done these calls and for them to have stimulated this creative response from people. And I think it's really intriguing when you have a call like this. how diverse, as you say, how diverse the approach is, and the actual the films that are drawn on, even if the same films are drawn on, the different approaches. So I think it's testimony to kind of creative limitations and how they can be, they can unleash quite a lot of stuff going on. So I'd really love to work with you again in 2 years' time. So yeah, I'm really interested in digging deeper into his physicality and his performances, and particularly his acrobatics. And Bristol's got quite a strong circus culture. We have Circa Media, which is a circus school. So I really want to delve into that, because I think it was his body that enabled him to have social mobility, his mastery of his body through training with the Penders. And so I think that's a really critical turning point in his life, and something that we can see in his physicality on screen. So that's the thinking behind it. So if anyone's got any thoughts or ideas of films that we should be screening as part of that, obviously Holiday I think would be really lovely to screen again, and probably To Catch a Thief, because he used to be an acrobat in that. And I've got a couple of other thoughts of things to show, but if anyone's got any ideas, then get in touch. But yeah, I'd love to work with you again, Will. I think this process, this collaboration just always elicits such interesting responses. So thank you so much for the opportunity to partner with you again.
No, thank you. And I think one of the images that stuck in my mind the longest is one that Kendahl isolates in your video essay, which is Cary, and he almost bumps in or tiptoes into the column, if you know what I'm talking about. And I was like,
Yeah.
It just was just isolating a moment like that. That really said it all to me, right? Like it's a metaphor for so much of
what am I doing here?
Exactly. Yeah. But still graceful nonetheless. So
Right.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us. And yeah, we really appreciate your time.
Hello, I'm Lara, and I did the Alfred and Archie video essay. When I initially read the submission for Cary Grant, a class act for the Cary Comes Home Festival, in collaboration with the Video Essay podcast, I was obviously initially interested in the idea of exploring how Archibald Leach's working class roots had almost impacted Cary Grant's filmography and legacy. But one of the first things I thought about when I read the submission was actually the video editing side of the video essay. So I've done video essays in the past, and not to say they were boring, but they have a slideshow style effect or editing style to them that's probably rooted in my childhood spent on Windows Movie Maker. But for me, what I really love about video essays, my favourite video essays, reflect a more kinetic style of editing. The one that comes to mind, and the one that really influenced me to go down the path of a more visual style of editing, is from the video essayist Kiki Crazed, who is absolutely fantastic. Her work on Luca and Ben-Hur, The Idea of a Big Race, is brilliant. I implore you, if you have a couple of minutes to hand, please watch it. Or if you have no time whatsoever, just watch the first 20 seconds of the video essay, because that is exactly the style of editing that I absolutely love. It is fantastic. So it was that sort of kinetic style that I really wanted to try at, and I really wanted to use for this video essay. And I think now it's quite a good thing that it was about Cary Grant, because it was an appropriate place to start considering this editing because of how kinetic, energetic and eye-catching Grant was as a star. When I was looking at the submission, The Idea of the Theme of Class, I obviously read through Archibald Leach's childhood and his working class roots in Bristol. And then I wanted to look at the bigger scale, his filmography, his legacy, and see how these roots had impacted on this. I'm very interested in the Hollywood star system, the idea that they are maybe not maliciously, but they're certainly erasing, back in the day, erasing stars' backgrounds from Cary Grant to Rita Hayworth. So I was really interested to see that even when Grant went through this rigorous system, whether Archibald Leach still made it to the surface, and he very obviously did. I highly recommend Scott Iman's book on Cary Grant called Cary Grant, A Brilliant Disguise. That was really the setting stone to my research, and it was really foundational in this idea that I started to play with in the video essay, the idea that it's not really Cary Grant and Archibald Leach. They're not two separate characters, but they're one person. It's like Peter Pan and his shadow, that whilst they may try and set distance between themselves, they inevitably come back together. They're one person. So when I was thinking about the video essay and in terms of class, I looked at what is probably Cary Grant's biggest collaboration, maybe one of his biggest legacies, and that was Hitchcock films, his collaboration with Alfred Hitchcock. It's a mainstream idea, it's probably more of a popular idea to go through, but for me and probably many others, this was the doorway to Cary Grant the movie star when I was watching Hitchcock films with my grandma on a Saturday afternoon when I was a kid. So I really wanted to have a look back there and see how much did the working class roots influence Cary Grant's collaborations with Hitchcock. And when I started watching these films, I was really taken aback by how much there is an explicit link to the working class, how much is hinted at on the screen. And for me, character introductions are so incredibly important. They say a lot about the character before we've even realised it. So I was really intrigued how every one of these introductions to Cary Grant's character in each of these films has a real tether to working class, to the idea of working class, whether that be a physical tether, whether that be a look, or more underplayed, the idea of a disguise, the idea of using a working class idea of public transport. That was all really fascinating to me, and that's what I really wanted to explore in my video essay. So for the other video essays, it's safe to say that I loved them all. This huge spectrum of expression is what I really love about video essays. There's so many that can come under the fold, and you really see that with these submissions. I loved the abstract and experimental pieces like Planes, Trains and Cary Grant or Cary Comes Home to Hallfield. I particularly loved Cary Comes Home to Hallfield. I loved the juxtaposition between this town that looks like any other town that you live in, and then the spectacle of Cary Grant in Hollywood. It really shows the balance of Cary Grant the movie star and Archibald Leach the normal man, so to speak. But then on the other side of the spectrum is more of an academic, structured, almost like more tangible analysis of a video essay. I come from a background of academia, so I have a real big soft spot for these type of video essays. So I was particularly drawn to Carrie and Archie in Holiday. I thought the analysis, in particular the narration, was so incredibly succinct and fantastically written and spoken. In particular, I think people don't realise how important narration, or the spoken narration of a video essay is, but it can make or break a video essay, and I thought that was such a succinct, really well written narration, really well spoken. I think it reflected very much what I find fascinating about Cary Grant as well, and I think it does a fabulous job at arguing the idea that it's not two separate people, and that the key to Cary Grant's allure as a star was really rooted in the background, that despite the Hollywood star system, it was ironically the Archibald Leach past that really was foundational and influential to Cary Grant's appeal to the wider audience. I also loved as well the incorporation of the physical transformation of Cary / Archie, you know, like the wispy curl and staggered walk of Archie compared to the composed and slicked back hair of Cary. It was a really fun watch, and I think all of them really highlighted what I love about video essays, you know, this idea that you can watch a film 10 times over and maybe take something back differently, but when you're introduced to a video essay about the same film, you can rewatch for the 11th time and feel like you're watching a completely different film. It introduces analysis to us that, you know, may never have even entered our minds. But yeah, that's what I love about video essays, and I think these submissions really reflect that. So it's been an honour to be placed by such wonderful video essays, and it's been a huge honour to be part of this video essay submission and working with Cary Comes Home Festival and the Video Essay Podcast. So thank you to Will and Charlotte for allowing me to do that. Thank you.
The Video Essay Podcast is hosted and produced by me, Will DiGravio. I also edited this episode. Emily Subin Co. is the show's associate producer. Thanks so much for listening.